I used to believe that life had a rhythm, a predictable, steady beat that carried you forward whether you wanted it to or not. For years I danced along to that rhythm, following the steps laid out before me without question. College, career, marriage, fatherhood. Each moment fell into place as if preordained, part of a pattern I never thought to challenge. But if I had paid closer attention, I would have noticed the irregularities, the offbeat moments, the times when the music faltered and the steps felt forced. Perhaps I would have seen the discord before it became unbearable. I remember the first time I felt it, a tiny tremor beneath the surface, warning me that something was shifting. It was a quiet, almost forgettable moment. Diana and I sat on the porch one humid evening, watching the boys chase fireflies. She laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that did not reach her eyes. I asked her what was on her mind, and she only smiled and shook her head. "Nothing," she said, brushing off the question. I hadn't pressed. I should have. Looking back, I wonder how many small moments I let slip by, how often I mistook distance for distraction and silence for contentment. I wonder if there was ever a version of our life where I could have changed the ending before it was written. But the truth is, maybe I had always known. That nagging feeling in the back of my mind, the weight in my chest, had been telling me for years what I refused to admit. No matter how much I loved Diana, or how much we built together, there was a part of her I would never truly reach. And tonight, as I stood in the dim hallway with my suitcases packed and my heart shattered, I finally understood that some things are beyond saving. Diana stood in the dim hallway, her eyes fixed on the packed suitcases, my laptop, and the briefcase by the door. They had been there for some time, yet only now did she truly see them. I watched as her throat tightened and her breath caught just before she turned to face me. "You've lost your mind, Lyle," she said, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "You're really leaving me and the boys over one fight." I replied, "I was drunk. I messed up. But I didn't cheat or betray you. Your acting like this is the end of the world." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. She took a step toward me, and instinctively I lifted a hand, not in warning, but to stop her from coming closer. She hesitated. That's when I saw it, a flicker of doubt in her expression, and the way her stance shifted ever so slightly. She understood now. This wasn't just frustration or wounded pride. It was something deeper, something final. Her breath hitched as she stepped back, her voice quieter but steady. "At least tell me why." I exhaled, because I finally saw things clearly. Her eyebrows pulled together. "Clearly," she echoed. "What does that even mean?" "You always talk as if you're the smartest person in the room, as if I'm too foolish to understand. Just say it in a way I can actually understand." I rubbed my forehead, knowing there was no way to soften this. "I'm sorry, Diana," I said. "I don't want to do this. But life traps us. We wake up, go to work, pay bills, worry about our weight, and who is watching whom. We get so caught up in the day-to-day that we forget to step back and see the big picture. Except sometimes something forces us to." She held her breath, waiting. "Tonight, that happened to me." She let out a sharp breath, frustration creasing her features. "You keep saying that, but what exactly did you see?" I met her gaze. Even in the dim light, I knew she felt the weight of what I was about to say. "I saw us, Diana, not just who we are now, but who we once were and what we've become. And this isn't about what happened at that party. You're right, leaving over one bad night would be ridiculous. That's not why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I finally admitted to myself that this marriage was a mistake. I love you, but not in the way that matters. And you don't love me the way you should. You never walk away, not because you're happy, but because you think staying is right. But we're too young to spend the next 40 or 50 years pretending this is enough." Her fists clenched at her sides, her breathing uneven. Maybe it was her heartbeat I could hear, or maybe it was mine. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. "That's why I'm leaving," I said. And the moment this conversation is over, I'm gone. Earlier, I had pulled into the driveway. My phone had been silent since I left Rivers Trailer Park south of Polatka. Diana and half her extended family had been drinking and dancing, just as they did every month for the last 8 years. In Moosin, Jacksonville, a city of 1 million people, it was dark except for the flickering glow of the automatic yard light. I dragged myself up the driveway, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. It had been a long night. I felt closer to 74 than 34. All I had wanted was to slip inside unnoticed with a 6-pack of Michelob Light. That was my only plan. I turned on the kitchen light, sank into the dining chair, and twisted the cap off a bottle. The cold liquid burned as it went down. I took another sip. I waited for my phone to ring. Silence. My gaze drifted toward the refrigerator. Billy's latest school drawings hung crookedly, held up by mismatched magnets. A photo of David mid-action, catching his first pass in a Pop Warner game, adorned the fridge. My throat tightened. David, with his mother's dark hair and light brown eyes, so different from mine. He and Billy meant everything to me. Diana, too, once upon a time. A few hours ago, I had nearly lost it all. It felt like standing in the middle of train tracks, watching a locomotive race toward me, knowing I couldn't move. I took another sip, then let my head rest against the table for a moment. I finished the bottle, stood, and headed upstairs. I pulled out the suitcases Diana and I had used on our last cruise to the Bahamas. Packed shirts, slacks, jackets, my razor, toothbrush, meds, everything I needed to start over. Leaning against the dresser, a wave of nausea threatened to rise, but I swallowed it back. This wasn't just a trip, it was an escape, and I wasn't coming back. If I thought about it too much, I'd hesitate. So I didn't. I just kept moving, one item at a time. I grabbed my laptop, my briefcase, and my college work. I carried it all downstairs, stacking everything near the dining room where it wouldn't be immediately visible. Then I picked up the 6-pack, now missing one, and went into the office. The hallway curved to the right, leading to a small office space. I sank into the armchair at the far end and set the drink on the glass coffee table. Behind me, a floor lamp stood unlit. I climbed onto a chair and adjusted the central light bulb so that even if someone flipped the switch, the room would remain dark. Satisfied, I leaned back, letting the weight of the house settle over me, a house that had never really felt like home. I opened another drink and sipped it slowly. My phone lit up. Diana. The small screen of my old Nokia flip phone glowed in the darkness. I let it ring. 3 minutes later, a voicemail. I ignored it. Another call, then another. 3 minutes, 5, 10. Diana again, then her father, her brother, her sister, and then Diana once more. If I still had the energy for it, I might have found the relentless calls almost funny. Whatever part of me once laughed at such things had burned out long ago. I wasn't sure I'd find anything amusing again for a long time, if ever. The house phone rang, then my cell, then the house phone again. I finished my second beer and cracked open a third. I had already lost everything, yet part of me clung to the impossible idea that maybe I could turn back time and undo tonight. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about tonight. It had been unraveling for years. Fixing it would mean rewriting the last 8 years of my life. And that wasn't possible. The November air carried a crisp chill, cool but not biting. Just beyond the large party tent, the RV park near Lake Como stretched out, nearly deserted. It was ideal for Richard Carter and his family's raucous monthly gatherings. No nosy onlookers, no law enforcement, just blaring music, endless booze, and a crowd eager to shake off the weight of the week. Richard and his wife, Ricky, had raised 9 children, 8 of whom were still living. Whenever their extended family and close friends gathered, the turnout easily exceeded 100 people. Richard, who had built a successful paving business and amassed a small fortune, took pride in hosting these legendary Saturday night celebrations. One rock blared from the speakers. Tables groaned under the weight of fried chicken, barbecued ribs, fresh oysters when in season, and more beer and liquor than the crowd could consume. Diana and I didn't attend every month, but we showed up when we could. Richard and Ricky did their best to welcome me. A northerner, an outsider, but I was never truly one of them. In their world, real men sold cars, built homes, or fixed engines. Me, I stood in front of disengaged college students, talking about literature, something that Carters had no use for. Drinking started early. By noon, bottles were being cracked open. There were trailers and cabins available for anyone who partied too hard. Diana and I, as always, arranged for trusted friends to watch our boys. Some nights we made it home. Other nights we didn't. It was an unspoken understanding. By nightfall, the old concrete dance pavilion pulsed with life. Modern rock blasted through the speakers. The scent of charred meat filled the air, and the crowd swayed beneath the glow of string lights. I wasn't much for drinking or dancing, so I lingered on the sidelines, absent-mindedly picking at a handful of grapes. And then I saw her. Diana moved through the dim light like something out of a dream, her white dress hugging her curves, her dark hair shimmering as it caught the last remnants of daylight. I had seen many beautiful women before, but never one like her. At these gatherings, I often watched her, reminded of how effortlessly she fit into this world. A world I would always be separate from. And yet, out of all the men here, she had chosen me. The Yankee, the misfit. I had taken her away from the long line of Southern boys who once hoped to claim her. As always, the combination of booze, loud music, and old relationships created tension. On the dance floor, Kelly's ex-boyfriend pressed too close, grinding against her until her husband, Billy, knocked him flat. 5 minutes later, they were shaking hands, grinning as if nothing had happened. Then Kelly pulled Billy into the shadows, where they did what they always did after a fight. The pavilion grew more crowded. Even Richard and Ricky swayed lazily to the beat. That's when I realized I had lost sight of Diana. A sinking feeling settled in my gut as I scanned the crowd. Then I spotted her. She was slow dancing with a tall man, his dark hair catching the glow of the lights. His hands drifted lower than they should have, fingertips skimming the edge of her dress. I saw her move his hands away, but it didn't matter. He held her too close. Bobby Trescott, one of her old admirers, the one who never accepted that she had chosen me. For years, he hovered at the edges, refusing to let go. He still called sometimes, still dropped by. Diana always insisted they were just friends. At every party, Bobby found a way to dance too close, his hands wandering where they shouldn't. He never missed an opportunity to take a jab at me, always drawing a laugh from the crowd at my expense. I stepped forward, my jaw tightening as jealousy seared through me. I forced it down. Diana was tipsy, not stumbling, but loose enough to melt into his arms. I pushed closer, making sure they heard me. "Mind if I cut in, Bobby?" Diana turned, her smile slow, lazy, and unbothered. "Hey, baby, I'm just sharing a dance with Bobby. It's our old prom song. I promised him one. You don't mind, do you?" Bobby smirked, and just to make sure I saw, his left hand slipped beneath the fabric of her blouse, brushing over her chest. The darkness shielded the moment from the rest of the party, but not from me. Diana's body tensed. She shot him a warning look, then turned to me. Was she angry at him for touching her, or at me for catching it? My fists clenched. "Bobby, take your hand off my wife," I demanded, my grin widening. "Or what, Lyle?" "Jesus, what kind of name is Lyle?" "Sounds like something you call a little girl," he mocked. He chuckled. "Lyle. That's too damn funny." I hadn't thrown a punch in 20 years, but I squared my shoulders. "I don't give a damn about my name." "Let go of my wife," I shouted. Diana finally pushed him away. "Okay, Bobby, enough. Why do you always act like a jerk around Lyle? He's my husband. He's not like you. You just want to bait him into a fight because you know you'd win. It's not fair." Then she turned to me. "Lyle, I'm not a child. Body's drunk, but I can handle him. I've known him my whole life. You don't need to turn this into something it's not." She was trying to save me. She thought I needed saving. A few people nearby caught the exchange. Muffled laughter trickled through the night. My pulse roared in my ears. "What the hell did you just say?" I demanded. Her expression shifted, as if she had just realized what had slipped out. "Oh, Lyle, I didn't mean. How could you say that?" Bobby shoved her aside and stepped closer. "She meant that if you try anything, I'll knock your teeth in." He leaned in, grinning. "The only reason I haven't is because she keeps begging me not to." What kind of man hides behind his wife? I thought, biting the inside of my cheek. "You know what kind." Bobby sneered. "A fool who stole my girl and thinks that makes him a man. Got her pregnant twice, but let's be real. Maybe she wasn't even sure you had what it takes." Footsteps pounded behind me. Diana's brother Dave and his friend lunged, grabbing Bobby's arms to hold him back. I moved forward, but my foot hit a slick patch. Spilled beer, perhaps. My legs gave out, and I crashed onto the concrete, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. Stars exploded behind my eyes. Bobby barely struggled against the hands holding him back. He didn't need to. He had already won. "Speaking of equipment," he added with laughter, "why don't you ask Diana? She used to think mine was very good. Hell, even a pencil would do a better job than you." Snickers rippled through the crowd. I forced myself up, scanning the faces. Some tried to hide their amusement. Then I found Diana. She wasn't laughing, but she wasn't angry either, and that was worse. Richard Carter's voice cut through the noise. "Enough, Bobby. You've been coming to these parties for years, but this time you crossed the line. Get the hell out." I turned to Diana, waiting for her to speak, but she only looked away deliberately. "Dad, don't," she said calmly. "Bobby just had too much to drink. He didn't mean anything. You know how he and Lyle are. They argue, but it's nothing. Besides, I promised him this dance." Then Richard looked at her like she was a stranger. "After what he said about your husband," Diana met my eyes, unreadable. "Lyle's a grown man, Dad. If he's upset, he knows what to do about it. Isn't that right, baby?" I stood silently and then turned to walk away. Bobby's laughter followed me, more chuckles in tow. I told and begged myself to believe Diana wasn't among them, but I didn't look back. As I walked away, Richard fell into step beside me, his voice low and measured. "Listen, son, I get that you're angry, but hear me out. I know Diana loves you, but women." He exhaled, shaking his head. "Even good women sometimes need to know their man will stand up for them. Maybe where you're from that doesn't matter, but down here, a woman won't respect a man who doesn't fight for her when another guy crosses the line. Even if Bobby knocked the hell out of you, at least she'd know you cared enough to try." I kept moving. "Maybe you're right, Richard. Maybe that's how it works here. But where I come from, women don't put their husbands in that position to begin with. Not if they love them. Not if their marriage is real." I met his gaze. Right now, I'm not sure about either. His hand caught my arm, and out of respect, I didn't shake him off. "Maybe she was out of line," he admitted quietly. "Maybe she crossed a line. I can't fix that. I'm just her father. But what I do know is, she loves you. Don't do anything reckless. Just cool off, have a drink. This will blow over, maybe." And then I left for good. Headlights pierced through the darkness. I sat in the dim glow of the living room, a beer and a half in me, not drunk, but detached enough to feel nothing. Car doors slammed. Muffled voices drifted through the night air. I stayed where I was, waiting to see who would come home. I cracked the window slightly, letting the cool night air in, even though the house was already cold. The driveway sloped downward, making it easy to hear their hushed conversation, as if they were right beside me. "He's here," Dave muttered. "Thank God, Diana." Kelly snapped. "What a damn coward," Dave added. "A pathetic excuse for a man." Kelly shot back. "Relax. After the stunt you pulled, be glad he came home at all, instead of running off with some random woman like most guys would." Kelly scoffed. "Shut up. He's my husband, Diana." Then she added, "A husband who sulks and runs off when his feelings get hurt. What kind of man does that?" Dave said sharply, "If you weren't my sister and if you didn't have kids, I'd tell him to pack his things and find someone who won't embarrass him like that." I sat still, listening. Diana had always been the picture-perfect Southern woman, never cursed, never raised her voice, not even behind closed doors. But tonight shattered many illusions. The front door swung open, and the hallway light clicked on. Dave stepped in first, with Diana right behind him. He spotted me instantly. "Hey, Lyle." The silence that followed was long and heavy. I wasn't about to speak first until Diana finally broke it. "Lyle, are you all right?" Dave asked. "Am I all right? Thanks for asking. You creep," Diana snapped. I smirked. "Love you too, sweetheart." Diana's whole body tensed. If Dave hadn't grabbed her wrist, I wasn't sure what she would have done. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and the once pristine white dress now wrinkled and stained. Whatever had happened after I left, the party had clearly gone on without me. "Clever as ever," she spat, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think it's funny to just disappear without telling anyone? Who does that?" I finally looked at her. "I don't know. Maybe the kind of man who watches his wife let another guy put his hands all over her in front of everyone." Color flooded her face, burning crimson. Dave shot her a look, then turned to me. "You had us worried, man. Why didn't you answer your phone?" he asked. "Didn't feel like talking." Dave exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Fair enough. Well, I'll leave you two to it. It's been a long night. A damn long night," he said. He hesitated before adding, "You sure you're okay?" I let out a humorless chuckle. "I'm not fine, Dave. Probably won't be for a while. But that's not your problem. Thanks for bringing her home. If it were up to me, she could have stayed with Bobby or crashed at the RV park." Dave glanced between us and let out a slow breath. "All right, Diana, walk me out." I stayed put as their voices drifted in from the driveway, just outside his truck. "Damn him, Dave," Diana muttered, frustration lacing her tone. "He's such a jerk. Any other man would have knocked Bobby's teeth in, or at least gotten drunk. Done something, anything, rather than just walk off." Dave sighed. "I would have kicked him. Bobby's a real jerk, so would half the guys we know. But Lyle's not that kind of guy. You knew that when you married him." Silence stretched between them before Diana spoke again, softer this time. Dave's voice dropped, measured but firm. "You told me. He's not the kind of man who comes home covered in grease, gets drunk every weekend, and spits on you when you gain weight. He'll take care of me and the kids. He'll be faithful. He's a good man. You want it better, and you got it. And now you're making a fool of him. I used to be proud of you, Diana." Dave continued. "Now I wonder if you're just another woman who will cycle through 4 or 5 husbands, dragging new boyfriends home while mom and dad shake their heads at the wreckage." "Jesus, Dave, grow up," she snapped. I got caught up in the moment, all right. It felt good to feel young again. My husband should have taken charge. He should have pulled me away, reminded me who I belonged to, but I forgot. He's not that man. He's mad now, but it'll pass. One night, one argument, I would go in, make it up to him, and by morning, this would all be forgotten. People don't split over one fight. Dave let out a humorless chuckle. "You really believe that? You think I don't know your husband? I know his world better than you do. I have clients whose kids go to GU. They talk about him. He's young, smart, and plenty of women on that campus find him attractive. You really think he's going to sit around sulking over you forever? Hell, I heard one of his coworkers chased him so hard that the dean had to step in, he sighed. So go back inside, do what you think you need to. But if you lose him, trust me, Diana, he won't be alone for long. The conversation ended. Diana stood in the office doorway, unmoving, silent. Then she took a step forward. I lifted a hand. Stop. Sit over there, by the TV. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She hadn't expected that. She thought she could walk over, kneel at my feet, wrap her arms around me, press her lips to mine. And that would make everything disappear, as if by morning none of this would matter. Not this time. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Lyle, I know I messed up tonight. I don't need another lecture. I've already had plenty. You'd think you were family, and I was an outsider with the way they've been talking to me. But I was drunk, all right. And so was Bobby. You know our history. We've known each other since we were kids. He never really got over the fact that I chose you instead of him. I feel bad for him. I really do. I arched an eyebrow. So what? You let him grope you out of pity. Her expression darkened, irritation flashing in her eyes. He's been struggling. A little harmless flirting made him feel better. It wasn't supposed to turn into anything until you stormed in, acting like a jealous lunatic and ruining it. He's my friend, Lyle. You're my husband, the man I love. She sat rigidly in the hard wooden chair, the most uncomfortable seat in the room, exactly as I had intended. I don't want to change the subject, I said in a measured voice, but I have a question. I left that party, and my phone didn't ring for 3 hours. I get that it was a big event with plenty of distractions, but 3 hours passed before anyone noticed I was gone. If we hadn't fought, you probably wouldn't have realized until morning. That says a lot about where I rank in your life. Her lips parted, anger flickering. But then she hesitated. Something seemed to click. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh my God, Lyle. You don't know, do you? I crossed my arms. Know what? She rubbed her arms as if suddenly cold. After you left, everything went sideways. Honestly, I forgot about you. For a while, everyone forgot. But that doesn't mean I don't care. It's just that things got crazy. I didn't blink. Crazy how? She asked, swallowing hard. After you walked off, I danced with Bobby. I was pissed. I know you're not the kind of guy who throws punches, but God, this sounds so immature. It hurt that you didn't even try. If he had touched you, I would have been there, loving on you, taking care of you. That's what I wanted. But you walked away instead. So yes, I was upset, and I danced with him. Her voice dropped lower. He was drunk. After a few songs, he disappeared. I assumed he went off to the lake or behind a cabin. I moved on, talked to some people, and honestly didn't give it much thought, until I heard someone scream. She exhaled slowly. Everyone ran toward the water, where a crowd gathered around someone on the ground. I pushed through, and she hesitated. It was Bobby. His face was a mess, one eye swollen shut. Everyone said his arm and a couple of fingers were broken. Dave and a few others stood over him, arguing about calling the sheriff. Apparently, 3 bikers jumped him, claiming we were making too much noise, disrupting their night. He fought back, but he was outnumbered. It was bad, Lyle. We called an ambulance, and the sheriff sent a couple of deputies to look for the guys who did it. After that, people began checking in, ensuring no one else was missing. I let the silence stretch before finally stating the obvious. It took 3 hours. Even after hearing that violent bikers were roaming around, you didn't stop to wonder where I was. Diana bit her lip and looked away. Then it clicked. You weren't even there, were you? My voice was steady, but my chest tightened. You went with him to the hospital. Her eyes met mine, hesitant at first, then bold, defiant. He was hurt, Lyle. He was in pain. He asked me to go with him. And you couldn't say no, I said flatly. It was the right thing to do, she snapped. If you weren't so mad, you'd see that. Of course, he's an old friend, one you used to be intimate with. Naturally, you had to be by his side. Her shoulders tensed. I took a step closer, my voice quieter but sharp. You slept with him, didn't you? She looked away for a second before locking her gaze onto mine, her voice calm and deliberate. Yes, Lyle, and you already knew that. It was serious. We were together often. And if you must know, he was good. Great even. Does that make me some kind of prostitute? What about you? You weren't a virgin when we got married. Should I resent every woman you've ever touched? I said nothing. That was the past. This is now, she continued. He asked me to go, so I went. I sat with him, held his uninjured hand while the paramedics worked. There were EMTs and people everywhere. Nothing happened, and even if we had been alone, it wouldn't have. Bobby respects me too much to try anything. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Did I say I was jealous? I wondered. You don't have to, she murmured. I see it every time he's around and I understand. Did you even think about me? She asked. I didn't answer. She looked down. Lyle, that's not fair. There was so much going on. Bobby was hurt, and people were scrambling to figure things out. So the answer is no. She didn't argue. When did someone finally remember I existed? Her voice was quiet. After they patched Bobby up, his brother came to pick him up. I rode back with Kelly and Billy. When I got home, Dad asked if I had seen you. I let out a slow, bitter laugh. That's great. Your father realized I was missing before you did. Her eyes glistened, tears threatening to spill. You're just trying to punish me now. I know I screwed up, and you want to twist the knife. Congratulations. It's working. She held my gaze, waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. A break in my anger, some sign of forgiveness. I had nothing left to give. Well, I said flatly, at least we got everything out in the open. Her head snapped up. What? I replied. I stayed because I wanted to talk to you first. Now I can leave. Panic flickered in her eyes. Where are you going? You're not serious. We fought. Fine, it was a bad one. But I love you. People don't just walk away over one argument. What happened to you? This morning we were happy. What could have changed in less than a day to make you want to throw everything away? I didn't answer. Instead, I gestured toward the hallway where our children slept. Go. She hesitated for a moment before rising from the chair and stepping out of the room. I knew exactly what she would find. My bags, the laptop, my briefcase, everything packed and ready to go. A few seconds later, she returned, moving more slowly. She looked at me in disbelief, as if her mind refused to process what she was seeing. You're really doing this, Lyle. You're seriously leaving me and the boys over one argument. Her voice wavered between frustration and desperation. I said, I was drunk, all right. I made a stupid mistake, but I didn't cheat. I didn't do anything that should make you throw our whole life away. You're acting insane. I didn't respond. She took a tentative step toward me, but I raised a hand, just enough to stop her from closing the distance. She froze, her shoulders tightening as she searched my face. Can you at least tell me why? Just give me that much. I met her eyes and had a moment of clarity. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. A moment of clarity. I sighed. God, Lyle, she muttered, rubbing her temples. I swear, sometimes I think you love making things sound more complicated than they are. I know you think you're smarter than me, smarter than my family, smarter than everyone here, but could you just once say something in a way I can actually understand? She wasn't wrong. I had spent years assuming my way of thinking made me superior, never stopping to consider how alienating that was. I'm sorry, Diana, I said, and I meant it. I don't want this, but sometimes we get so caught up in the routine of life. Getting up, going to work, paying bills, raising kids, worrying about trivial things, that we forget to step back and see the bigger picture. We don't realize how far we've drifted until something forces us to. Tonight, I finally saw the truth. She shook her head, frustration deepening. You keep saying that, but what does that even mean? What did you see? This was the hardest thing I'd ever have to say, because I knew once the words were out, there would be no going back. I was severing the life we had built together, shattering the future I had imagined with our children. With her, but she deserved to hear the truth. I saw us, Diana. I saw who we are now, who we once were, and what we've become. And none of it had anything to do with what happened at the party. You're right. Leaving over one mistake would be absurd. That's not why I'm leaving. She swallowed hard, bracing herself. I'm leaving because I realized our marriage was a mistake, that I love you, but you don't love me the way you should, and that I will never, and likely never, be enough for you in the way you need, and that you, as a good person, would never leave me, even if you should. But we're too young to spend the next 40 or 50 years trapped in something that isn't right. Her tears slipped down her cheeks. She wasn't just crying for herself. She was mourning the life we had built, the one we were about to lose. In that moment, I knew she did love me, just not in the way I had always loved her. How can you say that? She whispered. How can you be so cruel? I met her gaze, my voice steady. Answer 2 questions, and if I'm wrong, I'll stay. A flicker of fear crossed her face, as if she already knew what was coming. Have you ever cheated on me, Diana? Have you been with another man since we got married? She didn't say a word. Her silence told me everything. Thank you, I murmured. That's why I still love you. You could have lied, spun a half-truth, but you won't lie because you know the truth would destroy me. And we both know what the truth is. Silence had never felt heavier. And the second question, are you in love with me? Tears welled in her eyes. Lyle, I love you. How can you even ask that? My husband, that's not what I asked. She hesitated. You love your parents, our children, your siblings. You do anything for them. But being in love is something else. It's when just being near someone makes your heart race, when their touch sends a shiver through you, when you crave, dream about, and need them. That's how I feel about you. A sob caught in her throat. I don't know if you ever felt that way about me. I continued. Maybe you did once, but I know you don't now. You care about me, but not in the way a wife should love her husband. She sprang from the chair, moving toward me with fire in her eyes. Is this about sex? Is that what this is really about? You're mad because I'm not some wild woman in bed. I stepped into the light. She gasped, her face draining of color. Oh my God. I stared at her, my voice devoid of warmth. You never say my name when we're in bed, Diana. You've never sounded the way you do with someone else. Just let me do what I do. Do you really think I haven't noticed how little you want me? She asked. She stopped, hesitated, then reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against my face, tracing the swollen flesh around my nearly shut eye. I knew what she saw. Bruises and shades of deep purple fading into sickly yellow, a split lip, swollen and cracked. Her breath hitched. My God, she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. They got to you too. Why didn't you go to the hospital? I tried to smile, but even that small effort sent a sharp wave of pain through my face. Judging by her twisted expression, I must have looked as bad as I felt. You should see the other guy, I muttered. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Horror shifted into something else. Realization. I had stood by the lake after leaving the party, listening to the muffled music in the distance, pretending I could still hear the echoes of laughter. I didn't have to turn back to know she was still there, dancing with him again. I could have gone back, faced Bobby, and settled it right then and there. And I would have. I had taken plenty of attacks before, back when I was a scrawny kid running wild on the streets of South Boston, trying to keep up with boys who had no patience for someone weaker. I had fought, lost, and learned how to take a punch, how to survive, but I had never once felt as knocked down as I did now, because this wasn't about fists or broken ribs. This was about knowing, deep down, that the fight had been over long before tonight. Taking and knocking wasn't what scared me. That wasn't what held me back. It was the way she looked at me when she challenged me, daring me to react to Bobby's provocations, the way she let him touch, hold her, and move his hands over her as if he had every right. Somewhere deep down, I had always known. I had ignored it, pushed it away. But now I couldn't. She had given herself to him once, and no matter how much time had passed, that part of her life had never truly belonged to me. How do you build a life on something that was never real? I leaned against a tree, staring up at heavy clouds blanketing the sky, wishing I could rewind time and undo what had unraveled long ago. How do you forgive someone who was your entire world when you know they'd given themselves, their body, and maybe even their heart, to someone else? Had they mocked me? Had she really said I was nothing more than a joke to her? The sound of stumbling footsteps snapped me back to the present. Someone was crashing through the brush, their boots scraping against roots and gravel. I already knew who it was before I turned. I hadn't planned to do anything. Fighting was pointless. Throwing fists didn't fix betrayal. So when I punched him, I was as surprised as he was. My fists connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling. The sound he made wasn't a cry, just a sharp exhale as the impact took his breath away. Before he could react, I pushed him away with enough force to make him stagger. His body jolted from the blow, and this time he let out a deep, guttural groan. I swung again, aiming for his groin, but he twisted at the last second, and my boot glanced off his thigh instead. He reached out blindly, grabbed my leg, and yanked me off balance. I fell hard, my back slamming against the dirt, but I quickly pushed up onto my elbows. My vision adjusted to the dim light just in time to see him rising. My college ring must have sliced open his skin. "Jesus, Lyle," he muttered, wiping the wound with the back of his hand. "Didn't think you had it in you. Sneaking up on me like a coward. But hey, at least you finally grew a pair," he said. His voice dropped, more menacing. "But now I'm gonna hurt you. And when I'm done, I'll tell everyone, including Diana, what a pathetic little punk you are for throwing the first punch." I was still trying to stand when he lunged. His full weight slammed into me, knocking me flat. His fist came down like a hammer, cracking against the side of my skull. I never even saw it coming. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, and my left eye blacked out completely. My breath hitched, thick with the taste of copper. Then another, harder punch came. The world tilted. I couldn't see or think. Had he blinded me? I felt him shift above me, adjusting his weight, ready to end this. But instinct, or maybe sheer desperation, kicked in. I twisted my head just as his next punch came down. His fist glanced past me, and the momentum sent him staggering. That was my chance. I rolled away and scrambled to my feet. My ribs screamed in protest, but I forced myself upright. Bobby was already pushing himself up, but just as he reached his knees, I drove my boot into his face. His head snapped back with a sickening crunch beneath my heel. He collapsed onto his back, groaning. I went for another kick, but he was faster than I expected. He lashed out, his fist plunging deep into my stomach. My whole body seized. Fire shot through my ribs. I stumbled backward, gasping for air. Something was wrong. Every breath felt like a knife driving into my chest. Broken ribs. Bobby rolled onto all fours, his breathing ragged. He lifted his head, and I saw it. Something wild, something flickering in his eyes. This wasn't a fight anymore. He wanted to eliminate me. I couldn't let him take me down again. If he got on top of me this time, I wouldn't get back up. When he lunged, I sidestepped, sending him crashing forward. He braced himself with one arm, stretching the other out for balance. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed his outstretched arm and wrenched it backward, driving my forearm into his spine, pinning him to the ground. Something popped. Bobby screamed as his body bucked beneath me. He thrashed, trying to shake me off, but I didn't let go. I twisted his arm again, harder this time. His screams tore through the night. I wasn't sure if anyone could hear him, but no one was coming. He finally rolled onto his side, gasping for breath, his entire body convulsing in pain. Before he could push me away, I dropped onto his chest, one knee pressing down on his forearm, the other on his elbow. His breath hitched, the agony rendering him speechless. I slammed my knee into his elbow once, twice, then leaned in, letting my full weight settle onto the joint, keeping him pinned like a wounded animal. After a few seconds, I released him and rolled onto my back. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He clutched his mangled arm to his chest, rocking back and forth, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I should have felt guilty, but this man had humiliated me, wrecked my marriage, and taken my family from me. So no, I didn't feel bad. The distant hum of southern rock drifted through the trees. The party was still going. No one had noticed what had happened out here, and no one cared. I turned toward him again and grabbed his broken arm. Bobby flinched, trying to raise his other hand in defense, but I twisted his wrist sharply. A fresh wave of pain shot through him, and he groaned, his body going limp. "You're a real piece of crap," he spat, his voice weak but laced with bitterness. "You broke my arm, and you don't even care. Damn right. You won, okay. Just let me go. I need a hospital." "In a minute, Bobby." I crouched slightly, leveling my gaze with his. "First, we're gonna have a little chat." "Go to hell," he muttered. "I'll get help myself." I drove my elbow into his ribs twice. He recoiled from the hit, struggling to catch his breath as he stumbled backward. Grabbing his right hand, I pried his fingers apart. He was too weak to fight back. I took hold of his pinky, pressing it firmly between my thumb and forefinger. "I'm gonna ask you a few questions, Bobby," I said evenly. "And you're gonna answer honestly?" I asked. He glared at me through swollen eyes, his breath shallow. "Get lost," he growled. I bent his pinky back slowly, feeling the resistance before the joint gave way with a sickening crack. The finger hung limp at an unnatural angle. His eyes widened, his mouth opened to scream, but before any sound could escape, I drove my fist into his gut, right below his ribcage. The air whooshed from his lungs as his body convulsed, struggling for breath. I waited as his chest heaved and muscles twitched in pain. Only when I saw recognition return to his eyes did I speak. "Here's how this works, Bobby. Every time you lie, or if I don't like what you tell me, I'll break another finger. When you run out of fingers, I'll start on your toes. And if we still have unfinished business after that, well, bones heal, but some breaks never do. Got it?" His expression twisted with fury, but he nodded, his voice hoarse. "You think you're in charge now, Lyle? Fine, ask your questions. But one day this will turn around, and when it does, you'll vanish without a trace." "You know, Bobby," I said, tightening my grip on his mangled hand, "I might not have been enough for Diana, but I promise you one thing. You're never going to be enough for anyone ever again." His breath hitched as my fingers curled around my belt. "You remember that guy?" I continued calmly. "The one whose wife got creative with a kitchen knife. They stitched him up, but let's just say things were never the same again." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I wonder what the fish in the lake would make of you, Bobby. Maybe I should find out." For the first time, Bobby was truly afraid. His bravado cracked. His breath came in ragged gasps. He actually believed I was capable of doing it. For one dark, sickening moment, I thought I might. Then nausea crept over me. What the hell was I doing? Mutilating a man because I couldn't measure up to what my wife wanted. Because I couldn't satisfy her. He wasn't the one who betrayed me, She was. He had only done what countless men before him had done. The blame was on her. I released him and stepped back as he curled into himself, instinctively shielding what I had threatened to take. My head pounded, my body screamed in pain, but I forced myself to walk away. His voice followed me. "You really think I'm the bad guy here?" he muttered, shaking his head. "You act like I'm the one who turned your whole world upside down," he said, his voice shaking, not from pain, but something raw, something broken. "You were the one who ruined everything," he continued, his tone rising. "She was supposed to be mine. She was going to marry me, Lyle. She would have. Those boys of yours should have been mine. She loved me, or she would have. We were together since we were kids. We were good together. We burned for each other in ways you'll never understand. Then you showed up with your fancy words and your stupid books, talking about things she'd never even dreamed of. You tricked her into thinking she belonged in your world." I stopped walking and turned to face him. "You absolute fool," I said, shaking my head. "I was the best thing that ever happened to her. And you've never been able to get over the fact that she chose me instead of you," I added. A bitter, broken chuckle rattled from his throat. "Maybe you're right, Professor. Maybe I never did get over it." His swollen lips curled into a smirk. "But look at her now," she tried. "Man, she really tried to love you. She pretended she could live without passion, to be the wife you needed her to be. And me. I had to hide in the shadows, waiting for her to remember what she really wanted. And you, poor creep, you'll always be second place. Every time you touch her, every time she closes her eyes, you'll wonder who she's really thinking about. And you know what? Maybe you'll even learn to live with it." I turned away, leaving him there, writhing in agony on the cold ground. Lyle stood in front of me, his expression unreadable, his voice eerily calm. "That's why he told me everything, Diana, and I believe him. People don't usually lie when you break their fingers," I thought, pressing a hand to my mouth. "My God. 4 years," he repeated hollowly. 4 years, and he says you screamed for him every time. Was he really that much bigger than me? Tears blurred my vision as my breath came in shallow gasps. The way he looked at me, as if I had destroyed everything good in his world, shattered me. But beneath the pain, beneath the raw betrayal, I could still see love. "No, baby," I whispered. "Maybe a little, but that's not what this is about." My voice cracked. I didn't know how to explain it. It had always been that way from the very first time. No other man ever did that to me. It was like being electrocuted. That's not the right word, but it's the closest I can get. And I thought maybe, if I told you I felt something was missing, we could have fixed it, tried something new. I didn't know. Pills, toys, anything. I wiped my eyes, shaking my head. But how could I tell the man I loved that another man made me feel things he never could? No one's ego could survive that. His jaw tightened. "Then why didn't you leave me if he was everything you wanted?" "Because he wasn't," I whispered. "The sex. Yes. But love? No. That was always you, Lyle." His gaze softened for a brief second. Then he reached out and brushed a tear from my cheek. "I know you love me," he said quietly, "but you're not in love with me. That's the difference." I choked on a sob, shaking my head in denial. But it wasn't enough. Nothing I said would ever be enough. I stood frozen as I watched him move through the house, packing his things, his suitcase, his laptop, loading them into the car with quiet efficiency. When he came back inside, I was still standing there, my arms wrapped around myself. I lifted my hands, reaching for him, but they just hovered in the space between us, trembling. "I don't want this," I whispered. "Please, baby, we can fix this. There has to be a way." "There isn't," he said simply. He leaned down and pressed his lips against mine. I tasted salt. His lips caught the remnants of my tears. When he pulled away, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "Our marriage is over, Diana. I'll always be there for the boys. I want to be in their lives. But you and me, we're done. Because you hate me, I choked out. He looked at me then, really looked at me. What I saw there made my heart break all over again. No, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. I love you. That's what makes this so hard, he said, letting out a slow, shuddering breath. But you can't bring something back to life once it's already dead. I covered my face with my hands as sobs racked my body. I didn't hear the door open, but I heard it close. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.